Okay, in this presentation, I want to just give you a little bit clearer instruction on how to approach the Zine project, which includes a one-page judicial letter or a letter to a judge, and some representative symbol that you either draw or that you find that you think best kind of explains what you're getting at through this legal reasoning process. So I'm just copying and pasting here from the instructions that you already had. So I want to just kind of help you out. Understand that this is a multi-semester project. A zine is, kind of it was a popular counterculture idea that came up largely from the comic book world. Um, but for our purposes, I've learned over the last 10 years that students struggle with the research paper. So instead of constantly fighting that battle, especially in the online environment, it's much easier to help students with writing in person than it is online. I know a lot of you are already kind of stressed out of having to be online in the first place. So I want to remove that burden. So the zine is kind of, the replacement of the formal paper in the real world, right? So it's kind of like what fans do. So it's like a fan page. And so it's really just trying to get the basic important information into the most concrete form for everyday folks. So what students did last semester was kind of, to be honest with you, kind of a little bit boring. And so they mostly did PowerPoint presentations. So I have enough of those. Over 10 years, I probably have, 1,000 PowerPoint presentations. And those don't really capture what I'm looking for here. So I tried to design an assignment this semester that gets really clear at what I'm trying to get you to do and what the spirit of a zine is all about. So this class so far has been about learning to think and act and write like a judge. Um, and the process is called abduction, as opposed to two other processes that you learn in college. One's called induction, where you kind of put pieces together. A lot of the sciences use that method. And then deduction is probably the most familiar to you, even if you didn't know that what it's called. In your English classes, right, you'll take a reading and they'll want you to deduce what's the main point, what's the purpose of the reading, what's the author trying to say. There's nothing wrong with those forms of reasoning, but it's just not the way that lawyers and judges operate. So they use a different process, and that's mostly what I'm trying to teach you in this class, so that you can kind of understand how this works in larger society or in government. So what I thought would be helpful is if you thought about it this way, right? If you write a letter to a judge, right? And think about it in the sense of two ways. One is try to use the skills and the lessons you're learning from this class because you're writing to the audience of a judge, right? So you want to use that language and you want to use that format. Like if you're writing to an 8-year-old, right? You'd write to an 8-year-old like an 8-year-old. You wouldn't try to use a bunch of big words they don't understand. The second way of thinking about it, though, is that you're writing on behalf of a community that you think is important or an issue that you think is important. So a community can just be an issue, right? So if it's racism, then you're on behalf of victims of racism kind of thing. And, I provided an example for you of a student that's done the work. So I think, you just kind of want to think about it in that format. Again, I'm not concerned of the form of the letter. I'm concerned with, are you applying the things that you're learning in class? Are you just making stuff up on the fly, right? If you do that, you're not going to get a good grade. You have to show me that you're learning things and that you're applying that learning. The second part is it's much more, call it free or free form. I'm looking for a symbol. So on the right-hand side, there's 3 symbols. So the first one is a symbol on the top, is a symbol that a friend of mine and I made as a logo for the Global and Environmental Studies program. I'm the director of that program at Kingsborough, and we needed a logo. So this is the one we kind of came up with. And I'll let you interpret, like, what is that signifying, right? What are we going for with that symbol? And then the second one down is a pretty classic symbol, but this is actually a variation that I found in Florida when I was doing some legal research for a case down there. And it's a much older symbol of the symbol that the scales of justice symbol, but it's got a very American Indian kind of seminal influence to the drawing. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and you can see that the scales are actually a little bit out of balance, which is suggestive, right? And then the third one is one that I made for the program that I research in, and that you can do at John Jay if you're interested in these kind of topics, which is called Law and Society. So if you're interested in pre-law, right, that might be a good fit for you. And that's just kind of, showing you that the relationship between the courts and social relations is kind of in the perception of whether you're a judge, whether you're a victim, whether you're being labeled as a deviant, etc. So those are three that are personal to me. So you kind of see the idea here. I'm looking for you to be able to link up some symbol that kind of connects well with your letter. Again, I don't think you need to make this overly complicated. You just need to show me that you're applying the learning. So what does that mean? So I keep kind of trying to get you and other students to do this worksheet. I know it's not easy. Again, it would be better if we were doing this in class, but right, we all have to kind of, it is what it is, right? So really the format, as I explained to one student, and she was really, it was kind of easier to talk in person, right, over Zoom. But the format are those three sentences, right? So you start with a major premise, or a rule, and then you have some kind of application of that rule to a specific case, or a set of facts, right? And that's called a minor premise in logic. And then out of that, you reach a conclusion, right? So a lot of times what students usually do, or even just ordinary folks, right, is that they come up with their conclusion first, right? They have an opinion, and then they look for evidence to support their opinion. And, I'm a trained lawyer, right? So I don't think that's a very good way of making decisions. But again, right, I'm in the minority. Most humans make their decisions this way. The problem is that a lot of time you'll say something like very vague and very ill-defined concepts. So you'll say something like, that person is bad, right? That's your conclusion. Or I don't like that food. So there's not really much I can do if I were a judge to apply a rule to everyone that says, well, Jason doesn't like that food, so therefore no one can eat the food, right? You clearly see that doesn't make any sense. So a major premise, just kind of sticking with that example, is that all forms of food with cyanide are harmful to humans, right? You see the rule applies to everyone. And then the case would probably be something like cyanide, rat poison, right? Somehow got into some spaghetti at a restaurant, but it was a very small amount, so it didn't kill the person. It caused them, let's say, paralysis. And then, the kind of conclusion would be a rule that you've heard before, the punishment should fit the crime, right? So it wasn't intentional, the person wasn't trying to poison anyone, but they were negligent, right? So there should be some penalty that kind of deters people from being negligent, and that would be the conclusion in that particular case. So basically it's just a process, right? It's not so much a specific content, right? The content is going to be presented in the case, right? In the issue of injustice or the harm. But the conclusion has to be based on some legal principle, which will be a rule, right? Sometimes you'll hear it called a holding, but that's kind of very specific language that probably wouldn't apply to just starting out this way, right? That's more of a law school kind of way of thinking about it. So I give you this kind of rule, right? So here's the rule, and this clearly comes from the 14th Amendment. But then you should try to think of some case, right? It doesn't have to be a legal case. Some of you are getting hung up on that idea. You could probably find a legal case, but you could just think about this, imaginary or hypothetically. Some situation in which someone is treated in a way that violates the rule above. And then what you'd want to do is come up with a conclusion. Now, pay very close attention, right? The case and the conclusion, I'm not asking you for a paragraph. I'm not asking you for a page. I'm asking for 2 sentences, right? So just really try to get it down and narrow. And that's really what lawyers do. I mean, we're called wordsmiths, right? We take complex ideas and we reduce them into really tight, clear sentences, because the more words you have in something, the more likely it's going to be interpreted wrong. And then you want to think about the reason, right? And this is the part of the class that gets a little bit harder, right? I'm sure some of you are saying this is already hard enough. I agree with you, but this is the class. Um, so, the case and the conclusion here, you then need to explain your reasoning, right? And that's where the judge, their independence or their discretion, or, there's different words that people use, but let's call it the soul of the judge or the individualism of the judge, depending on your philosophy. That's where it comes through. So as I kind of indicated, there's on the one of your readings, Justice Cardozo talks about how a judge makes these decisions. In that piece that he wrote, he also goes on to compare it to basically like making food in the kitchen, right? So you have to take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you mix it together with this, you put it over this heat, right? There's all these pieces that go into a decision. That's what you have to explain in the reason, right? So you could say something, like, I agree with the rule because, and then explain, your life experience or some reading that you've done. But again, try to relate that to the coursework, right? That's what I need to see in the class. A lot of times students probably know a lot of things, but then they don't tell me they know them. So I can't really give you a good grade if I don't see that you are learning the material. So again, the reason is going to be a little bit longer, but it doesn't have to be too long, right? Again, this is practice to write the one-page letter to the judge, and you're going to want to write in not exactly this format, although you may. That would be the safest way to write the letter. But again, you might want to be a little bit more creative, but just don't start out with the conclusion, I guess would be the warning. Now, let's review a little bit some of the assignments that you have to do that help you prepare for this letter, right? So don't just run off and write the letter. If you want, you can write a little draft and then amend it or change it as you go through these assignments. But these assignments are basically helping you learn the process and giving you some specific guidelines. When you do the Zine peer review, you should see kind of what are the cases, what are the issues that are coming up that students think are important. So that gives you really the ordinary thinking, but it also gives you how students were applying their knowledge from the class last semester. So that kind of gives you a roadmap. The next one is probably the most difficult. Students to struggle with this part, but again, it's just for you to try it out. Just try and see if you can apply these principles, and I'm not expecting anybody to be an expert through a 6-week class, but I do want to see that you're kind of improving, and so that's where the readings come in. You need to now apply this knowledge, this process that you're gaining to the readings. And so each of the readings really, right, these are, especially the one about the fire this time, that's written by a lawyer. So the other one, the basketball one, DeLand, is written by a legal scholar. And so, those two are really setting up this process exactly the way, I've been kind of giving it to you. They're analyzing rules, applying them to specific cases, and then coming up with conclusions. You'll see that again in the Blackstone reading. You might see some of the principles in the Judiciary Act, and then the 2 legal cases that I provide for you, one on terrorism, the other one on gay marriage, really, really get into this. And Judge Downing is a very good writer, obviously. And he really provides an excellent kind of example. Obviously, you're not going to need to write that much, right? Not that long, but you get the idea, and that gives you a sense of who you're writing to. And obviously, you could do some more research on other judges if you prefer, thinking about it that way. Like, I'm going to write a specific judge. I'm going to write to Justice Sotomayor. That's fine too. It's your choice. It could be a judge in Brooklyn, for that matter. So this last part of the semester is really getting you to kind of think about these cases. And again, cases is a legal case, but it's also a case or conflict, right? That's happening in society, that's happening in the community, and then practicing this process. And that's really all this class is really about. The legal system is about legal thinking, right? It's about legal process. How is the courtroom, how is the judge, the job of a judge different than the corrections officer or the police officer? It's a whole different way of thinking. But this is what lawyers and judges do. And then, just reminding you, I'm going to keep pushing this abduction worksheet. Feel free to take it more than once, right? Fill out this Google form and see if you improve. That shows me that you're doing better, right? You're not going to be punished through this assignment, I'm just trying to help you out, and this is the best we could do. Again, we do this in person if we could. So this is like the next best thing that I can come up with. And then just this is a way of just checklist, right? If you want to get a good grade, like first and foremost, right? Did you show me legal reasoning? That's why I keep pushing that worksheet. Did you carefully review student peer work from the fall? I'll know that because you refer to it. You'll say something insightful about one or more of the student work that you saw on the website. You have to show me that you understand kind of the learning outcomes and what I've been talking, at you about. Are you showing me that you're thinking like a lawyer and a judge? Again, I'm not asking you to master it. I'm not asking you to be perfect at it. Just even if you're struggling with it and you're trying it out, you use a word wrong, that's okay. At least you're trying. And that's what I'm really looking for on that part. But you also need to start showing me that you really understood the CSI article as wishful thinking, right? This world that we kind of live in of community, ordinary folks are thinking about the law very differently than the way lawyers and judges. So there's this huge gap in what we wish the law would do. We wish it was equal. We wish that it was a command. We wish that there'd be consequences for everybody that doesn't follow it. A lot of people wish it was more moral or religious, but that's rather naive, right? That's not how the real world works. And so you need to show me that you understand that. And then, it has to be a symbol that fits. So you should probably explain the symbol at one point. It could be a sentence or two. But, if the symbol doesn't make sense to me, I'm going to wonder whether you really understood this project or if you spent very much time doing it. And again, you might think about the symbols that come up in those readings. That's an activity we did in class when we worked together or in person. And that was pretty easy for students to be able to do the reading and come up with different symbols that they thought of as they were doing the reading. That might be something that you try to do. And then finally, you could create one thing I've been thinking about, and I suggested to one student who's actually in Intro to Criminal Justice right now. Think about making a little zine, just a one-page handout that would be helpful for students in that class, right? That I can use, that Professor Barnaby, Trotman, McMorris, Seward, and Chapman can use to kind of help people understand, like, what is the basic function of the courts, right? Because that's not something we want to talk about in class. That's not really what this class is about, but obviously you kind of need to understand that. So we'd prefer you learn about that in POL 63, right? So you learn who are the actors, right? Like the judge, the bailiff, those things. That's not for this class. That's for the intro class. What are their roles? What are their responsibilities? We've actually done mock trials in that class in the past just to help students kind of better understand that. So we're thinking like, well, in this kind of new internet age, right? What is a way we could do the same thing, but with a one-sheet handout that we can kind of help students use. It could be 2 or 3 pages. I'm not going to limit you. This website here at the Washington State Court System, the OAC, has just a lot. They've been doing a lot of internet sources for now close to 20 years. So you might check them out and see if anything inspires you. They have a little booklet that is for like everyday people. So you might think about it. And you could make this specific to, say, landlord-tenant law, to gentrification, to employment discrimination. There's lots of ways you could think about the stop and frisk, right? So, again, that's just for extra credit. And that's a pretty, 10% is a pretty big boost, right? That would be, if you had a B plus, suddenly you'd have an A minus or an A depending on the rest of your work. So, consider it. It might be as you're working on your letter, you might just put together a little one sheet, and I'd be happy to give you extra credit for that. And obviously you're emailing those 2 things. So hopefully this helps. Again, if you have any questions, just let me know.